I think the most important thing we have to understand is the fear factor. So global epidemics have occurred in the past, they will occur in the future. That's just part of how these viruses occur. What's important, if you look at the front cover of Barron's this week, it said fear factor. People don't really understand what to do, and as a result, they're panicking. So at the same time, it's critically important how, and we really need to understand how these viruses and epidemics are impacting global economies. So if you take, for example, SARS that erupted in 2003, the Center for Strategic and International Studies did an important report on global health security in November of 2019. And they actually priced out the cost to economies and individual cases. So for example, SARS that occurred in 2003 cost the economies of Southeast Asia between 40 and 45 billion. If that translates into about $5 million per case. If we take the Ebola virus, for example, that cost the global economy roughly around $53 billion. And if we average that out per case, that comes out to roughly about $1.8 million per case. But here is the staggering figure. If you look at the MERS epidemic that occurred in South Korea in 2015, that cost the South Korean economy roughly between 10 and 13 billion. If you do the math, that equates to roughly $50 million per case. So now we come to the coronavirus. Literally every continent in this world has the coronavirus with the exception of Antarctica. And so you can see how this is going to have a very important impact on the U.S. economy. Currently, we're looking for this is going to impact, when it first occurred, people were saying this is going to impact the economy the global GDP about 0.1%. Now economists are saying this could impact global GDP growth anywhere between 0.3 and 0.7%. So this is going to have a very, very important impact on both the U.S. economy and the global economy at large. What's really important is to understand how we got to this point. So if we take a step back, last year the S&P was up 30.4%. There was so much liquidity in the market. And many analysts were saying, oh, the coronavirus, 90% of the infection rates are in China. We're not seeing that spread to other parts of the world. And so by and large, most economists and analysts in the United States didn't feel that the virus would spread widely outside of China. That changed. And as you saw the eruption of cases in Iran, you saw the eruption of cases in Italy, and then we started to see the United States get a few cases, people started to panic. And the reason why investors started panicking is because they had made such significant gains last year. They did not want to lose, those gains, and so they panicked and started to sell. Now, there are three important points to understand. One is that when you look at what's driving that fear on Wall Street, it's not so much the number of infections, right? There are over 93,000 infections. It's the mortality rate. It's the number of people who are dying. That is what's driving the market. The compilation of all of these factors drove the markets to sell last week. In 2003, when SARS first erupted in China, China accounted for roughly about 4% of the global GDP. If you look at in 2019, China accounts for roughly about 19.3% of total GDP. And so you're going to see that China, and when you factor in the importance of global supply chains and how that has such a vital impact on not just the US economy, global economies. Just take pharmaceuticals, for example. 80% of all the pharmaceutical supply chains that the US companies are dependent upon in the United States come from China. Currently, we have a huge shortage of medicines, antibiotics, currently in the United States because of what has occurred with the coronavirus and how it has impacted the global supply chains within China. And so as a result of that, China today is going to have a disproportionate impact on the global economy when things like the coronavirus and epidemics occur. When you look at SARS, which occurred in 2003, when SARS occurred, the S&P actually was up 14.9% when the outbreak first occurred. If you look at 12 months later, the S&P was up 20.9%. Now, the story was a little bit different in China. China in 2002 grew at about 11.1%. When SARS occurred, you saw within the first quarter that China's economy went from 11.1% to 9.1% in the first quarter. And by the end of the year, China finished out the GDP at 10%. So people argue that if you look at SARS, it really took off about 1% of GDP for China. Now, if you look at the US economy and other epidemics, what we've seen with Ebola, Zika, and H1N1 is that you see a small decline in the market, particularly in the first or the second quarters. But generally, the markets have continued to rise. So they've taken a short-term hit, but mid to long-term, the markets have performed quite well. Coronavirus is a little different. As we said, one is the infection rates. The infection rates are significantly higher. In addition to that, we're also seeing some isolated cases where some people have been infected by the coronavirus, then gotten well, and then 4 days later got reinfected with the virus. So what is really causing concern in the markets is the fact that we do not fundamentally understand all the aspects of this virus, and that's impacting the markets both in China, the US, and more globally at large.